I guess I should start by telling you a bit about myself. I'm Jake, a public defender from Boston. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and I like to think I'm pretty damn good at it. I'm the guy who stands up in a courtroom day after day, fighting for the ones who can't afford fancy lawyers or don't have anyone else in their corner. It's not an easy job, but I've always been a sucker for a good cause. I've been doing it for almost 10 years now. Jill used to say that I was born to do it, to fight for the little guy. Funny how things change. Jill, my wife, she's something else. When we met, she was this bright-eyed journalist with dreams of changing the world. She had this fire in her that drew me in, made me feel like I was caught in the orbit of something incredible. I was a second-year law student back then, and she was covering the courts as an intern for the Boston Globe. We met in a courthouse hallway over coffee that had gone cold. We talked about everything that first night, our dreams, our ambitions, our fears. I remember thinking I'd found someone who saw the world the way I did, someone who wanted to make a difference. We've been married for 12 years now. She left journalism a few years back, moved into PR for some big tech company. The money was better, and she seemed happier for a while, but the fire in her eyes had dimmed. We didn't talk about work much anymore. She'd come home late, tired, and distracted, but I chalked it up to the demands of her job. Maybe I didn't want to see it. Maybe I chose not to notice the distance growing between us. Lately, though, things have been off. It's hard to put my finger on exactly when it started. There were the small things at first. She'd leave her phone face down on the table whenever she got a text, a slight hesitation in her voice when she talked about her day. She started working out more, buying new clothes, taking more care with her appearance. I tried to convince myself that it was just her wanting to feel good about herself. I ignored the late nights, the business trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. Then, there was the night I came home from a particularly grueling day in court. I'd won a tough case, and I wanted to celebrate. I called her on my way back, but she didn't pick up. When I walked through the door, the house was dark, and Jill wasn't there. I tried not to jump to conclusions. She could have been stuck in traffic, or maybe she'd gone out with some friends. But when she came home hours later, she looked surprised, almost annoyed, to see me. She said she'd been at the gym, but her hair wasn't even damp, and I could smell a faint whiff of perfume on her. I started paying closer attention after that. Not obsessively or anything, just watching. I noticed how she seemed distracted, how her eyes seemed to wander when we talked, how she would sometimes smile at something on her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I'm a lawyer, and I know how to read people. And Jill, she was hiding something. So when she told me about this high school reunion in Miami, something just didn't sit right with me. She was almost too eager to go, kept telling me that I didn't need to come along, said it would be boring for me, that I wouldn't know anyone there. I agreed at first. I trusted her. But then, 2 days before she left, I overheard a conversation, half muffled through the bathroom door while she was getting ready. I heard her laugh, that throaty laugh she used to save just for me. And then, her voice lowered, all soft and secretive. She mentioned someone named Tom. When I asked her about it later, she brushed it off. "Oh, Tom," she laughed. "Just an old classmate. Don't even know if he'll be there." But I could see a flicker in her eyes, a slight twitch in the corner of her mouth. I nodded and let it go, but that name stuck with me. Tom. It gnawed at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. So I decided to surprise her. I caught a flight to Miami, telling myself it was a romantic gesture, but deep down, I knew I was going to find something, even if I wasn't ready to admit it yet. I checked into the same hotel, slipped into the lobby just as the reunion party was getting underway. And that's when I saw her, laughing in that red dress with a man I had never seen before. And the way he was touching her. It was as if I wasn't even there. I didn't confront her right then and there. I wanted to watch, to gather more, to be sure of what I was seeing. I suppose you could say I've always been the type to overthink things, to see the connections where others don't. That's what makes me good at my job. I can piece together fragments of a story, find the lies hiding between the lines, and then use them to tear a witness apart on the stand. But now, it was my own life that felt like a case file, my own marriage that seemed to be hiding something in the spaces between what was said and what wasn't. After I saw her with that guy in the lobby, I found a quiet corner and watched them. They seemed comfortable together, too comfortable for old classmates catching up after so many years. Jill was animated, her hands moving as she spoke, her eyes locked on his. And him? He was leaning in, nodding, a sly grin plastered on his face, his hand lingering on her waist a little too long. They moved from the lobby to the bar, his hand sliding down her back as they walked. I slipped into a shadowed booth near the bar, close enough to hear snippets of their conversation. I ordered a drink I had no intention of finishing and pretended to scroll through my phone, though my attention was fixed entirely on them. She laughed again, that same laugh that had caught my ear back at home. "Tom, you haven't changed a bit," she said, her voice light, playful. My stomach twisted at the sound of that name. Tom. So he was here, after all. Her face was lit up like I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. And he leaned in closer, whispering something I couldn't catch, but it made her blush. Blush like a damn teenager. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching them, trying to piece together what this all meant. Did I confront her? No, not yet. I needed more. I needed to know if this was a momentary lapse or something deeper, something that had been festering for longer than I cared to admit. And besides, I didn't want to cause a scene. Not yet. I went back to my room, my mind buzzing with questions. I didn't sleep much that night. How could I? I kept thinking of every strange moment, every odd look, every late-night text she'd ever received. I thought of all the little lies, the deflections, the changes in her that I'd tried so hard to ignore. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd see when I walked out of that room the next morning. By morning, I had decided. I would follow her, watch her every move. If she was going to betray me, I would make damn sure I knew all the details before I acted. I needed to know everything, and that was when everything started to unravel. The next morning, I was up early. Too early. My body was running on adrenaline, and every nerve felt like it was tingling, on edge. I headed down to the lobby, hoping to catch a glimpse of Jill before she left for whatever plans she had for the day. Sure enough, I spotted her in the cafe, sitting at a table by the window with Tom. His hand was already wrapped around hers, his thumb rubbing small circles on her skin. And Jill? She was leaning in close, her smile softer than I'd ever seen it. I kept my distance, grabbing a paper and pretending to read, but my eyes never left them. They spoke in low tones, their heads close together, their laughter mingling in the air. I could feel the jealousy burning in my chest like a hot coal, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think like the lawyer I was. Observe, don't react. Gather evidence, build a case. They finished their coffee, and I watched as they made their way out of the hotel, hand in hand like some lovesick couple. I followed at a distance, careful to stay out of sight. I'd done this kind of thing before, tracking down witnesses or digging up dirt on someone I needed to discredit in court, but I never thought I'd be doing it to my own wife. I watched as they walked down Collins Avenue, taking their time, pausing to look in shop windows. They looked like they belonged together, like two pieces of a puzzle that fit perfectly, and the sight of it made my blood boil. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, forcing myself to keep my distance. They stopped in front of a boutique. Jill pointed to a dress in the window, and Tom leaned in, whispering something that made her laugh again, her hand playfully slapping his shoulder. I watched as they went inside, and I found a spot across the street, behind a group of tourists snapping pictures of the Art Deco buildings. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I waited. Minutes later, they emerged from the boutique, Jill now carrying a small bag. I felt a surge of anger at the sight. He was buying her things, and she was letting him. They started walking again, and I fell back into step, staying just out of their line of sight. They turned a corner, heading down a quieter street, and I picked up the pace, closing the gap just enough to hear bits of their conversation. "I've missed this, you know," Jill was saying, her voice soft, intimate. "The way we used to be. I didn't realize how much I needed this until now." Tom smiled, his hand brushing her cheek. "I've missed it too, Jill. I've missed you." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The words hung in the air, and I had to lean against a lamppost to steady myself. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. How long had this been going on? Had she been seeing him this whole time, right under my nose? They continued down the street, oblivious to the turmoil boiling inside me. I forced myself to move, to follow, my hands trembling as I clenched my phone in my pocket. I thought about calling her right then, confronting her in the middle of the street, but I knew it wasn't the time. Not yet. They stopped outside a small cafe, Tom holding the door open for her like some goddamn gentleman. I waited a moment, then crossed the street, ducking into the entrance of a bookstore next door. From my vantage point, I could see them through the window, could see the way Jill's hand rested on Tom's arm as they talked, their heads close together. I needed to get closer. I slipped into the cafe and took a seat at the back, pulling out my phone and pretending to scroll while my ears strained to catch their words. Tom leaned in, his voice low. "Have you thought any more about what we talked about?" Jill's expression grew serious, and she nodded. "I have. I want to. But I'm scared. What if he finds out?" He. I knew she was talking about me. My stomach twisted as I listened, feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. Tom's voice was calm, reassuring. "He won't. We'll be careful. You deserve to be happy, Jill. You deserve more than what you have with him." I could feel my pulse racing, the blood roaring in my ears. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream, to storm over there and punch that smug look off Tom's face. But I kept my composure. I needed more. I needed to hear it all. Jill bit her lip, looking down at her hands. "I know. But he's a good man. I don't want to hurt him." I wanted to laugh at the irony. Didn't want to hurt me? She was already tearing my heart out, piece by piece, with every word. Tom reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Jill, sometimes we have to do things that hurt others to find our own happiness. You have to think about yourself for once." Jill hesitated, then slowly nodded. "You're right. I know you're right." I felt a wave of nausea, my hands trembling as I held onto the table. It was real. This was really happening. I'd been hoping, maybe foolishly, that it was all a misunderstanding, that there was some innocent explanation for all of it. But there wasn't. I was losing her, and I was losing her to a man I didn't even know. I couldn't sit there any longer. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, causing a few heads to turn. I walked out of the cafe, feeling their eyes on my back. I needed air, needed to breathe, needed to think. I stumbled out onto the street, the midday sun blinding me, making my head spin. I found myself leaning against a wall, gasping for breath. My mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, anger, hurt, and betrayal, all churning together in a storm I couldn't control. How long? How long had she been with him? What did he have that I didn't? Was it the money, the excitement, the thrill of something new? I realized I couldn't just walk away, not now. I needed to know everything, every sordid detail, every lie, every secret she'd kept from me. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal before I decided what to do next. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I pulled it out and saw her name on the screen. She was calling me. For a moment, I hesitated. Did she know I was here? Was this her trying to throw me off? I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, Jill." "Hey, babe," she said, her voice too casual, too cheerful. "Just wanted to see how you're doing. Did you get any sleep?" "Sleep?" I nearly laughed. "Yeah, a little," I lied. "Just grabbing some breakfast now. How's the reunion?" She hesitated for a split second, then said, "Oh, it's fine. Just catching up with some old friends. You know how it is." "Yeah, I know how it is," I replied, my voice steady, hiding the rage bubbling underneath. "Have fun, okay?" "I will. I'll call you later," she said, and I could almost hear the smile in her voice. "Yeah," I murmured. "Talk soon." I hung up, my hand shaking. She had no idea I was here, watching her. She had no idea that I knew everything. And that was going to be her biggest mistake, because now I was going to find out just how deep this betrayal went. And when I did, I'd make damn sure she regretted every single second of it. I didn't see Jill or Tom again for the rest of the day. After that phone call, I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a fog of my own anger and disbelief. I walked aimlessly along the Miami streets, my thoughts racing, trying to piece together the puzzle of how my life had come to this point. How had I missed the signs? Had I been so absorbed in my work that I didn't see my own marriage crumbling around me? By late afternoon, I was back at the hotel, nursing a drink in the bar. The place was starting to fill up with people from the reunion, their laughter echoing off the walls. I scanned the crowd, searching for Jill's face, but she wasn't there. I felt a strange mix of relief and frustration. Relief that I wouldn't have to see her with him again, but frustration because I needed to know more. I needed to see more. I knew I couldn't keep following them around like some detective in a bad crime novel. I needed a different approach, something more discreet. I had a few contacts in Miami, old law school buddies who had gone on to work in private investigation. I made a call, explained the situation, and within an hour, I had a plan. I hired a PI to tail Jill and Tom, someone who could get the information I needed without being seen. I gave him their descriptions, the places they'd been, and told him to start immediately. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, like I was finally taking control of the situation. I had been on the back foot for too long, and now it was time to get ahead. While I waited for updates, I went back to my room and tried to clear my mind. I knew I needed to stay sharp, to keep my emotions in check. I couldn't let my anger cloud my judgment. I had to think like a lawyer, cold, calculated, and strategic. I had to prepare for what might come next, for whatever truth the PI would uncover. I had to be ready for anything. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a message from the PI. "Got some good stuff. Meet me in the lobby in 30 minutes. I felt my heart pick up speed as I read the words. Good stuff. What did that mean? I quickly freshened up and made my way down to the lobby, my nerves buzzing with anticipation. The PI was waiting for me in a quiet corner, his face impassive, a manila envelope in his hand. He was an older guy, grizzled and tough-looking, with a no-nonsense demeanor that told me he'd seen his share of dirty dealings. "Jake," he greeted me with a nod. "Got some things you might want to see." "Lay it on me," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice betrayed the tension running through me. He handed me the envelope, and I opened it with shaky hands. Inside were a series of photographs. The first few were innocuous enough. Jill and Tom walking, laughing, sitting in a cafe. But then the next few, my breath caught in my throat. There was a picture of them kissing. Not just a peck on the cheek, but a full, deep kiss. Her hands were in his hair, his on her waist, pulling her close. It was intimate, passionate. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I flipped to the next photo, and there they were, standing outside a hotel room. Room 714. Jill had a keycard in her hand, and Tom was behind her, his hand resting on her hip, whispering something in her ear. She laughed, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. The last picture showed them slipping inside, the door closing behind them. I felt sick. There was no denying it now. No way to pretend that this was anything but what it was, an affair, blatant and shameless. I wanted to tear the photos up, to throw them away and pretend I hadn't seen them, but I knew I couldn't. I needed them. I needed proof. "You okay?" the PI asked, his voice low. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I just needed to know." He gave me a sympathetic look, the kind of look you give a dog that's been kicked too many times. "Look, man, if you need anything else, I'm here. Just say the word." "Thanks," I muttered, tucking the photos back into the envelope. "I'll let you know." I walked away, my mind a blur. The images burned into my brain, playing on a loop like some sick movie I couldn't turn off. I felt like I was walking underwater, each step heavy and slow. I made my way back to my room, shutting the door behind me, and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling. I thought about all the times she had lied to me, all the little moments that suddenly made sense, the late nights, the secretive smiles, the phone calls she took in another room. All of it was so clear now, like a veil had been lifted from my eyes. And the worst part was, I still loved her. God help me, I still loved her. I lay there for what felt like hours, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge, of justice, of what I could do to make her feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. I thought about going to that hotel room, barging in and catching them in the act. I thought about screaming at her, calling her every name I could think of, throwing all of her stuff out of our house and slamming the door in her face. But then I thought about something else, something darker, colder. A plan began to form in my mind, a plan that would take patience, strategy, and a bit of cunning. I was a lawyer, after all. I knew how to manipulate, how to twist the knife slowly. If she wanted to play games, I would play too, and I'd play to win. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I got dressed, checked my phone for any messages from Jill, but there were none. Not a surprise. She was probably still holed up in room 714 with Tom, blissfully unaware that I was on to her. I made a few calls, pulling some strings, using my network to start digging into Tom. I wanted to know everything about him, where he was from, what he did for a living, how he knew Jill. I needed to understand my enemy before I could destroy him. I wasn't just going to let this go. I was going to unravel his life, piece by piece, just like he was doing to mine. A few hours later, I got my first break. A friend in the tech world confirmed that Tom worked at the same company as Jill. They had been colleagues for the past year, and from the looks of it, their friendship had been more than professional for quite some time. He had been transferred to the Miami office recently, which explained why he was here. I felt a surge of anger, mixed with a strange sense of relief. At least now I knew where to start. I spent the rest of the day digging deeper, learning everything I could about Tom, his likes, his dislikes, his weaknesses. I found out he had a reputation for being a charmer, a smooth talker, but also a man with a few skeletons in his closet. A nasty divorce a few years back, rumors of shady dealings at his last job. He wasn't as clean-cut as he appeared. By the time evening rolled around, I felt like I had a decent picture of who Tom was. A snake, a weasel, the kind of guy who'd stab you in the back while smiling to your face. He was perfect for Jill, really. They deserved each other. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the PI. They're at the beach now. Lots of touching, kissing. I'll send more photos soon. I clenched my teeth, my blood boiling. I was tempted to rush down there, to confront them in front of everyone. But no, that would be too easy, too predictable. I had a bigger plan now, something that would take time, but would be far more satisfying in the end. I was going to make them both pay, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. I sat back, my mind buzzing with possibilities. I could ruin his career, expose him for the fraud he was. I could make sure he never worked in tech again, make him a pariah in his own industry. As for Jill, well, I still had to figure out what I wanted from her. Did I want her back? Did I want to punish her? Or did I just want to watch her crumble under the weight of her own choices? I didn't know yet. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next few days were a blur of carefully orchestrated moves. I followed Jill and Tom's every step, with the PI sending me updates every few hours. It was like watching a bad soap opera unfold in real time. Their stolen glances, secretive smiles, the way they seemed to drift into their own little world when they were together. It was sickening, and yet I couldn't look away. I spent most of my time making phone calls, setting my plan in motion. I found out more about Tom, enough to know he was a man who had climbed up the corporate ladder with charm and manipulation. He had left a trail of burned bridges behind him. Colleagues who resented him, ex-girlfriends who had a few choice words to say. He wasn't just a threat to my marriage. He was a man who needed to be taken down a peg or two. I dug deeper into his life, pulling in favors from old friends who owed me. I learned that his ex-wife, a woman named Cynthia, was still bitter over their divorce and had accused him of some pretty shady behavior, financial mismanagement, possible fraud. Nothing had ever been proven, but there were enough whispers to know that Tom wasn't the upstanding guy he pretended to be. The more I uncovered, the more I began to see a way to turn this situation to my advantage. I wasn't just going to watch Jill betray me. I was going to use it. Use it to ruin Tom, to make sure he paid for what he was doing to me, to us. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to make Jill regret every single choice she'd made. I'd thought about telling my brother Greg about everything that was happening, but I hesitated. Greg and I had always been close, but he was a hothead, prone to flying off the handle. If he found out Jill was cheating on me, he'd probably drive down to Miami himself and try to beat Tom to a pulp. I needed to handle this on my own. I needed to control every aspect of it. I kept my distance, continuing to shadow them from afar, my emotions simmering just beneath the surface. I watched as they went to dinners, shared long walks on the beach, even visited a gallery, all things Jill and I had done together over the years. I felt like I was watching my life unravel, thread by thread. One night, as I sat alone in my hotel room, staring at the photographs the PI had sent, my phone rang. It was Jill. I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart racing before I finally picked up. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice bright and cheery. "How's everything?" "Fine," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Just busy with work stuff. How's the reunion?" "Oh, you know," she laughed. "The usual. Catching up with old friends, lots of boring small talk." "I miss you, though." The words stung, cutting through me like a knife. Miss me? I wanted to scream. How could she stand there and say that when she was sleeping with another man? But I forced myself to stay calm, to play the part. "I miss you too," I lied. "I can't wait for you to come home." There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost feel her uncertainty through the phone. "I'm glad you called," she finally said. "I was thinking, maybe when I get back, we could take a little trip, just the two of us. Get away for a bit. What do you think?" I nearly laughed out loud. A trip? Was this her way of assuaging her guilt? "That sounds nice," I said, my voice steady. "We'll talk more about it when you get back." "Okay," she said softly, her voice filled with a sincerity that made me sick to my stomach. "I love you, Jake." "I love you too," I murmured, the words like ash in my mouth. I hung up, feeling a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I felt like I was going insane, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But I knew I had to keep my cool, to stick to the plan. I couldn't let her know I was on to her. Not yet. I spent the next few days gathering more dirt on Tom. I reached out to Cynthia, his ex-wife, under the pretense of needing a character reference for a business venture. She was more than happy to talk, venting her frustrations about how Tom had lied, cheated, and manipulated his way through their marriage. She had even suspected he was embezzling money from their joint accounts. I made a note to dig into that later. I knew there might be something there I could use. I also started looking into his current position at Jill's company. I found out that he had recently been put on a special project, something that didn't sit right with me. I called in another favor, and sure enough, I learned that the project involved some rather large sums of money moving around in ways that didn't make much sense. My instincts told me Tom was up to no good, and I was determined to find out exactly what. Then one evening, I got a message from the PI. They're headed back to the hotel. Room 714 again. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the words. I knew what was about to happen. I knew I could go down there, barge in, catch them in the act. I knew it would be ugly, but it would be final. I'd have the proof in my hands, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to make Jill feel some semblance of the pain I was feeling. But I hesitated. I felt a different plan taking shape in my mind, something more intricate, more deliberate. What if I let them think they were getting away with it? What if I let them dig themselves deeper and deeper until there was no way out? I could expose Tom for the fraud he was, bring him down in a way he'd never see coming. And Jill, well, Jill would have to live with the consequences of her choices. I decided to wait, to watch, to let them believe they were safe for a little longer. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of resolve. I knew what I had to do. I called the PI and told him to keep a close eye on them. I needed more photos, more evidence. Then I set about laying the groundwork for the next phase of my plan. I contacted a retired fire chief I knew, a tough, no-nonsense guy named Murphy who owed me a favor. I explained what I needed, something that would make a statement, something that would hit Tom where it hurt the most. Murphy didn't ask too many questions. He'd seen enough in his years to know better than to pry. We met later that afternoon in a small cafe off the beaten path. He was already sitting at a back table when I arrived, nursing a cup of black coffee. "Jake," he nodded as I slid into the seat across from him. "This sounds like quite the mess you're in." "You could say that," I replied, giving a bitter smile. "But I need your help, Murphy. I need to make sure this guy pays for what he's done, for what he's doing to my wife, to me." Murphy leaned back, studying me with those sharp, calculating eyes. "You want a controlled burn," he said, more a statement than a question. "Exactly," I said. "Something that won't put anyone in danger but enough to scare the hell out of him, enough to make him think twice about ever crossing me again." He nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've got just the thing. I'll take care of it. You just make sure you're not anywhere near when it goes down." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. It was risky, sure, but I needed to feel like I was doing something, taking control of the situation instead of just letting it happen to me. I was tired of feeling powerless, tired of feeling like the world was crumbling beneath my feet. As I left the cafe, my phone buzzed again with another message from the PI. "They're heading back to the beach. Looks like they're settling in for a romantic dinner." I clenched my jaw, shoving my phone back into my pocket. Let them have their dinner. Let them laugh and toast to their lies. They had no idea what was coming. I felt a grim smile stretch across my face as I walked back to my car. The wheels were in motion, and soon enough, they'd see just how much I'd learned from my time in the courtroom. I was done playing nice. Now, it was time to play hardball. Murphy worked fast. The man was nothing if not efficient. 2 days later, I got the message I had been waiting for. "It's set for tonight. Be ready." I was ready. I had been ready since the moment I saw those photos, since I first felt the knife twist in my gut and realized just how deep Jill's betrayal went. I knew that my plan was starting to take shape, but it needed to play out just right. Timing was everything, and tonight, it all began. I made my way to the hotel bar, settling into a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. Jill and Tom were still playing their little game of cat and mouse, pretending they were just old friends reconnecting, but it was obvious to anyone paying attention that they were far more than that. Tonight, they'd made reservations at a fancy restaurant along the water, the kind of place that was all about candlelight and soft music. I had already tipped off the PI to follow them. As I sipped my drink, my mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. The documents I had obtained on Tom's shady financial dealings were almost ready. I had crafted an anonymous email to send to his company's compliance officer, loaded with enough evidence to make even the most lenient HR department take notice. But that was just the first step. I needed to time everything perfectly, for maximum impact. Then, just as planned, I saw Jill and Tom enter the lobby, her arm looped through his, her laughter spilling into the room like she didn't have a care in the world. I watched as they walked past me without even a glance in my direction. Tom was wearing a crisp white shirt, his dark hair slicked back, looking every bit the corporate shark he was. Jill was dressed in a slinky black dress, the one she'd worn on our last anniversary. The sight of it felt like a slap across the face. They paused at the front desk. I saw Tom say something to the receptionist, then hand over his credit card. I leaned in closer, pretending to read a menu, trying to hear what they were saying. Jill laughed again, lightly touching his arm, and I caught the words "special delivery" from the receptionist. Special delivery? I wondered. I kept my head down, my ears open, listening intently. The receptionist handed them a small envelope, and Tom tucked it into his jacket pocket with a smug smile. My curiosity was piqued. What was this about? I had been tracking their movements so closely, I didn't think they'd have the chance to set up anything I didn't already know about. They left, heading for their dinner reservation, and I took a deep breath, holding myself back from following them right away. I needed to stick to the plan. Murphy would be ready soon, and everything had to go down like clockwork. About an hour later, I made my way to the parking garage, taking the back stairwell to avoid being seen. I found Murphy waiting by his old, beat-up Chevy pickup, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He looked up as I approached, giving me a nod. "You sure you want to go through with this?" he asked, exhaling a plume of smoke into the damp night air. "Once we start, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," I replied, my voice steady. "Just make it look like an accident. No one gets hurt, just rattled." Murphy nodded again, flicking his cigarette to the ground and crushing it under his boot. "It's all set up. You get to the vantage point I showed you and keep your head down. This will be over before you know it." I watched him walk away, a mixture of nerves and adrenaline coursing through me. I knew I was taking a risk, a big one, but I was past the point of caring. I needed them to feel what I was feeling. I needed them to see what happened when they crossed the wrong man. I made my way to the side alley near the hotel, positioning myself just out of sight of room 714's window. I waited, my breath coming in slow, measured intervals, my eyes scanning the surroundings. I could see Murphy's silhouette in the shadows, moving with purpose, preparing for what was about to happen. I didn't know exactly how he would do it, a fire, a distraction, maybe some smoke, but I trusted him to deliver. The minutes ticked by like hours. I checked my phone. The PI had sent a message saying that Jill and Tom were finishing their dinner and heading back to the hotel. Perfect timing. My heart was pounding in my chest as I watched the front entrance, waiting for them to reappear. I saw them at last, arm in arm, Tom whispering something in Jill's ear that made her smile in that way that used to be just for me. I felt the anger surge again, but I pushed it down. I had to stay, focused. They made their way to the elevator, and I watched the numbers climb floor by floor until it stopped on the 7th. The door opened, and they stepped out, oblivious to what was about to unfold. I watched them disappear down the hallway toward their room, the tension in my chest building like a coiled spring. Then, a minute later, I saw Murphy move into position. He slipped something under the door of room 714, a small device, barely noticeable. He moved back quickly, retreating to the shadows. I waited, holding my breath, and then nothing. For a moment, everything was still. I wondered if something had gone wrong, if Murphy had messed up. But then, I heard it. A faint hissing sound, like air escaping a tire, and then a small pop. Suddenly, smoke started pouring out from under the door of room 714. I saw the flicker of lights, heard the sound of the fire alarm shrieking to life, and then the confusion began. I saw hotel staff running, guests pouring out of their rooms in a panic, and then the door to room 714 burst open. Jill and Tom came rushing out, coughing, eyes wide with fear. The smoke billowed around them, and I could see the panic setting in. Tom was shouting something, but it was lost in the chaos. They stumbled down the hallway, tripping over themselves in their hurry to escape. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction watching them scramble, watching the perfect little bubble they had created burst in an instant. This was just the beginning. Just a taste of what was to come. Murphy slipped back into the shadows, unseen. I knew he'd done exactly what I'd asked. Just enough smoke to set off the alarm, to create a scene, to scare the hell out of them without causing any real damage. It was a message, a warning, and I could see in their faces that it had been received loud and clear. I watched as they stumbled out of the hotel, coughing and disoriented, looking around in confusion. Jill's eyes were wide with fear, her face pale. Tom had his arm around her, trying to calm her down, but I could see the doubt in his eyes, the flicker of uncertainty. I let them go. For now, there would be more to come, more games to play. This was just the start, just the first move in a much longer, much darker game. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed with a new message. This one from an unknown number. I know what you're doing, Jake, and I know why. Let's talk. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Who could this be? Who else knew what I was planning? Was it Tom? Someone else? I felt a chill run down my spine, but I shoved it aside. I was too deep in now to turn back. I'd come this far, and I wasn't about to stop. Not until I had what I wanted, and I knew exactly where to start looking for answers. I stared at the message on my phone, my heart pounding like a drum. I know what you're doing, Jake, and I know why. Let's talk. My mind raced with questions. Who the hell was this? Was it someone from Jill's company? Maybe a friend who had caught wind of my digging around? Was it Tom himself, trying to play some mind game to throw me off? I felt a familiar burn of anger rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. I needed to think clearly, to stay calm. Whoever this was, they knew something, and that meant they were a threat. I stared at the screen, debating my next move. I could ignore the message, pretend like it didn't bother me. But no, that wasn't my style. I wasn't going to hide from this. Fine, I typed back. Where do you want to meet? The reply came almost instantly. Meet me at the old marina, slip 27, midnight. The old marina. Of course. Out of the way, quiet, no prying eyes. Whoever this was, they knew how to play this game. I glanced at the clock. It was only 10 p.m. I had 2 hours to kill before the meeting. I decided to head back to the hotel to see what the aftermath of my little stunt looked like. When I arrived, the lobby was a mess. Guests were still milling about, confused and annoyed, some of them arguing with hotel staff. The fire department had shown up, and they were in the middle of clearing out the smoke. I caught a glimpse of Jill and Tom standing outside, huddled together in a corner. Jill looked shaken, her hair disheveled, her makeup smeared. Tom was speaking to a hotel manager, his expression tight, controlled, like he was trying to assert some kind of authority over the chaos. I stayed out of sight, watching them from a distance. I could see Tom's face hardening as he spoke to the manager, no doubt demanding an explanation, compensation, anything to smooth over the disruption. Jill was clinging to his arm, still looking dazed, and for a brief moment I felt a pang of guilt. I pushed it away. They had brought this on themselves. I slipped back into the shadows, deciding I'd seen enough. I needed to get ready for the meeting at the marina. As I made my way out of the hotel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned, scanning the lobby, but no one seemed to be looking in my direction. I took a deep breath and headed to my car. 2 hours later, I pulled up to the marina. The place was deserted, the only sound the soft lapping of water against the docks and the occasional creak of a boat rocking gently in its slip. The air was thick with the smell of salt and seaweed, and the fog was rolling in off the water, giving everything an eerie, dreamlike quality. I parked and stepped out, my footsteps echoing softly on the wooden planks as I made my way down to slip 27. I could see a figure standing there, silhouetted against the faint glow of a nearby dock light. They were leaning casually against a post, smoking a cigarette, the ember flaring bright with each drag. As I approached, the figure turned, and I felt a jolt of recognition. It was a woman, tall, with sharp features and dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. I didn't know her, but there was something familiar about the way she held herself, something confident and unapologetic. "You're Jake," she said, her voice low and calm. "You've got guts showing up here." "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, keeping my distance. "How do you know what I'm doing?" She took another drag of her cigarette, blowing the smoke out slowly before answering. "My name is Sally," she said. "I'm a friend of Tom's, or at least I was." Jill's best friend, Sally. My mind flashed back to all the times Jill had mentioned her. They'd been inseparable once, back in college. I hadn't realized she was still in the picture. "What do you mean you were a friend?" I asked cautiously, watching her closely. Sally smiled, but it was a cold, bitter smile. "Let's just say Tom and I have a complicated history. We were more than friends once before he decided I wasn't worth his time, before he moved on to your wife." I felt a cold twist in my gut. "Why are you telling me this? Why are you here?" "Because I want to help you," she replied. "Tom thinks he's untouchable, that he can do whatever he wants and get away with it. But he's wrong, and I think you and I can help each other. Bring him down." I studied her, trying to read her intentions. She seemed sincere, but I knew better than to trust appearances. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come to me now, when things are already in motion?" Sally's expression hardened. "Because I know Tom better than anyone. I know how he operates, what he's planning, and I know that he's been using Jill, and she doesn't even realize it." "What do you mean, using her?" I demanded, stepping closer. "What the hell are you talking about?" She took another drag of her cigarette, then flicked it into the water. "Tom is in over his head with some bad people, investors he's screwed over, deals that have gone south. He's been using Jill's access at her company to move money around, to cover his tracks. She doesn't know it, but she's his alibi, his scapegoat. If things go bad, she'll take the fall, not him." I felt a surge of anger, my fists clenching at my sides. "And you're just telling me this now?" "I didn't know how far he'd go," Sally said, her voice sharp. "I thought maybe he was just using her to get back at me. But when I heard about the special project at her company, I started digging. It's bad, Jake. Real bad. If you don't act fast, Jill could end up in a world of trouble." My mind was spinning, trying to process everything she was saying. I didn't know whether to trust her, but I knew one thing for sure. I needed more information. "Why do you care?" I asked, narrowing my eyes at her. "Why not just let them burn?" "Because I loved Tom once," she admitted, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "And because I don't want to see Jill get hurt, not like this. She's not blameless, but she doesn't deserve to go down for something she doesn't even understand." I took a deep breath, considering my options. "So, what's your plan? What do you want from me?" "I have documents," she said, reaching into her jacket and pulling out a flash drive. Evidence that ties Tom to the money laundering, to the fake accounts. If you can use this to get to the right people, we can expose him before he has a chance to use Jill as a scapegoat. I hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took the flash drive from her. And what do you get out of this? Sally's smile returned, colder than before. Revenge, Jake. I get to see Tom's life go up in flames, and I get to watch from a front row seat. I nodded, slipping the flash drive into my pocket. Okay, Sally, I'll look into it. But if you're playing me, I'm not. She cut in sharply. Trust me, I want to see him burn just as much as you do. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to gauge her sincerity. Finally, I nodded. Fine, I'll be in touch. As I turned to leave, Sally called after me. And Jake, be careful. Tom's dangerous when he's cornered, and right now, he's running out of options. I nodded without looking back, my mind already racing with plans. I had more than enough evidence now to bury Tom, but I needed to play this carefully. He had made a mistake, trusting the wrong people, crossing too many lines. And now, he was about to pay the price. As I walked back to my car, I felt the cold night air bite against my skin. I knew things were about to get even more complicated, but I was ready. I had nothing left to lose, and I would make sure Jill and Tom lost everything.